On a frozen northern coast, a beached whale skeleton arched like a bony cathedral, and inside it, a man was building a home.
You are a madman, Samuel, living in a corpse.
Samuel didn't answer. He pulled the hide tighter, his frostbitten hands working with grim purpose.
The driftwood huts are good enough for sane men. You'll die in that bone tomb. Storm's coming. You'll freeze in that bone cage before morning.
He worked faster now, his breath misting in the cold. The sky pressed down like iron. Rook whined, pressing close to Samuel's leg. The dog felt it too, the pressure dropping, the wind shifting.
You'll crawl back to us before this is over.
Samuel pulled the frozen hide tight, his face set like the winter itself. Then the first gust struck. The gray sky thickened into a swirling white wall, and the storm began to swallow the coast. Before the storm, before the mockery, Samuel had washed ashore on this same coast, the sole survivor of a ship crushed by ice. He'd stumbled through the snow, half dead, until he found the giant rib cage rising from the drifts like the bones of the earth itself.
7 men went down with the Reliance. I carried their faces here.
He'd pressed his palm against the ancient bone, feeling its cold, and for the first time since the ship went down, he'd seen a way to survive. Now, with the storm bearing down, he packed the final seam with frozen snow, his fingers numb, but his mind clear.
Reliance. The name had been a bitter joke, but this shelter, this would not betray him.
Rook nudged his elbow, pulling him from the memory. The dog's breath was warm against his frozen cheek.
It'll hold, Rook. It has to.
He pulled the frozen hide tighter, his movements no longer frantic but deliberate, as if the whalebone spoke to him of endurance. Outside, the first heavy snow began to fall, erasing the footprints of the men who had mocked him. Only the whale shelter remained, a dark shape against the white. But the mockery had not ended with the storm. Mikolai trudged across the frozen sand, his face twisted with contempt.
You truly mean to stay in that carcass? The stench alone will kill you, if the cold doesn't.
It's stronger than your driftwood.
Stronger? Those bones are hollow. One good gust and they'll collapse on you.
As if on cue, a sudden gust howled across the beach. The driftwood huts behind Mikolai groaned and shivered. A flicker of doubt crossed the old man's face, something he could not entirely hide.
This whale has held against the sea itself. Your huts will be kindling before the night is through.
When you are frozen solid, don't expect us to dig you out.
Samuel didn't watch him go. He bent lower, sealing another seam, while Rook pressed close, a low growl rumbling in the dog's chest. The wind rose to a shriek, lashing snow against the bone walls. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. Samuel pulled the last frozen hide into place and lashed it tight across the entrance. The shelter was sealed. He knelt and struck a spark into the blubber oil lamp. A small flame bloomed, casting amber light against the rib walls. Rook circled once on the pile of furs and settled, his pale eyes fixed on the door. Outside, the wind became a solid roar. Snow drove against the bones like a sandstorm, shaking the hides. Through the white, Mikolai hammered a driftwood plank over a gap in his hut, his curses swallowed by the gale. Another hut cracked audibly. A woman's shriek cut through the storm as snow poured in through the splinters. Inside, Samuel leaned against a rib, his hand resting on Rook's thick fur. He listened.
It will hold. It has to hold.
The shelter groaned under a violent gust, but the packed seams did not give. The bones held steady. Far away, something heavy collapsed with a sound like a felled tree. The storm had claimed its first structure. The first hour passed in tense silence. Then, Samuel felt it, a thin blade of cold air sliding across the back of his neck. He turned and found the seam between 2 ribs, where a thread of light was not light at all, but a stream of freezing air. He dug frozen snow from the floor and packed it into the opening, pressing until his fingers burned and the draft vanished. He pulled a strip of blubber from the whale meat he'd stored and fed it to the lamp. The flame steadied, burning brighter than before.
The whale wasn't just shelter. It was fuel. It was food.
He sliced a piece of frozen meat and held it out. Rook took it gently, tail thumping against the furs.
We won't starve. Not here.
He found another crack near the floor, a whisper of cold. He sealed it with frozen mud and hide scraps when he finished. The air inside the ribcage was still and warm. The storm outside seemed a distant thing, but the wind rose again, a shriek that made the bones tremble. The night was far from over. In the survivors' camp, the driftwood huts shuddered like dying animals. Mikolai braced a wall with his shoulder, shouting orders into the gale. A plank tore free and vanished into the white. Snow blasted through the gap like buckshot. A child's wail rose thinly above the wind. A woman screamed. Then, with a splintering groan, the smallest hut collapsed. Figures scrambled out, crawling on hands and knees. They fled to Mikolai's hut, now crowded with 9 shivering bodies. The roof sagged under the weight of snow. A voice cut through the chaos. "We should go to the whale."
I'll not crawl to a madman.
The wind drowned the answer. Another board splintered. The hut lurched. Mikolai stumbled, catching himself on a post. Outside, the storm swallowed all light. The driftwood huts were failing, one by one. Inside the shelter, Samuel heard it. A thin, distant scream carried on the wind. Not an animal, but a human voice. He moved to the hide door and pressed his ear to the frozen leather. The storm muffled everything, but he heard more shouts now, and the crack of splintering wood. Rook growled low, then let out a soft whine. The dog looked up at Samuel, as if asking what they would do.
They called me mad. They wanted me to freeze.
Another scream, closer now. A distinct cry for help. Samuel's jaw tightened. He looked from the lamp to the door and back. The space was small, but not impossible.
There's room for a few.
His hand closed on the frozen hide flap, but he did not pull it. Outside, a loud crash. More wood splintering. The shelter trembled. Samuel flinched, but still, he did not move. The storm would make the choice for them all. Mikolai's roof gave way with a roar. Snow and shattered planks crashed down on the huddled figures. They clawed out of the wreckage, gasping into the full fury of the blizzard.
To the whale. It's our only chance.
Bent double against the wind, he led them through waist-deep drifts, his pride burning like frost in his throat. Inside the shelter, Samuel pressed his ear to the frozen hide. Muffled shouts and the crunch of boots reached him.
Mikolai's voice, hoarse, desperate. The old man had come.
He peeled back the hide a sliver. Dark shapes stumbled through the white. Drawing closer, Mikolai's fist hammered against the whale ribs. The sound echoed through the shelter like a drum.
Letting them in could cost him everything. The warmth, the fuel, the fragile safety he had built.
But the fists pounded harder. A voice screamed through the storm. "Samuel, for God's sake." Samuel tore the frozen hide away, and the blizzard roared into the shelter like a wild animal. One by one, frost-covered figures scrambled through the gap, gasping and shaking. Rook barked a warning, but Samuel gripped his scruff, and the dog fell silent, pressing close. Mikolai came last, his face a mask of shame. He could not lift his eyes. Samuel lashed the hide shut, sealing the storm outside. The shelter settled into a tense stillness. He guided them nearer the blubber lamp. Its amber glow fell on frostbitten cheeks and trembling hands. For a moment, no one spoke.
You were right.
Samuel nodded once and pressed a piece of dried whale meat into Mikolai's hand. He moved among them, drying a child's frosted hair with a scrap of hide, his touch gentle as a father's. Outside, the storm shrieked through the bones, but inside, a fragile warmth kindled among the survivors. Samuel lifted the lamp so the others could see its wick, the oil, the flame born from whale fat. A thin voice rose from the shadows. "Where did you learn this? To turn a whale into a home?"
Desperation. When you have nothing, you learn fast. The whale taught me the rest.
Mikolai chewed the whale meat without meeting anyone's gaze, the taste of shame sharper than the cold. Samuel knelt beside a woman with frostbitten fingers, chafing her hands between his own to bring back blood. The blubber lamp guttered once, like a dying breath, then steadied. The amber glow held firm. Rook had settled by the hide door. A wall of fur and watchful eyes, guarding the entrance from the storm.
I thought you were a fool, Samuel.
So did I at first, but this whale gave what driftwood could not.
Outside, the wind's shriek sank to a low, weary moan, as if the storm itself was tiring. The wind answered with a sudden, violent gust that shook the whalebones from ridge to floor, and the blubber lamp guttered wildly. A thin jet of snow dust hissed through a gap near the roof, sharp as powdered glass. Mikolai saw it too, and without a word, both men lunged toward the breach. Samuel scooped frozen snow from the floor, and Mikolai pressed a scrap of dried hide into the crack.
Like caulking a boat.
Exactly.
The hissing stopped. For a long moment, they held each other's eyes in the amber glow, then clasped hands, a pact sealed in blubber oil and snow. Outside, the wind's rage drained away until only a low, weary moan remained. The shelter filled with a heavy, hollow silence, broken only by the whisper of the lamp and the breathing of the living. A thin voice rose from the huddled figures. "Is it over?" The silence held, heavy as the snow outside. Then a woman wept, and the sound was more relief than sorrow. Mikolai let out a shuddering breath, then placed a heavy hand on Samuel's shoulder.
You lost your ship.
And my friends. All hands. I was the only one who reached the shore.
Samuel's eyes were fixed on a rib, distant, as if looking through the bone to the sea that had taken everything.
Now we are your crew.
A faint smile stirred under Samuel's frosted beard. Rook, sensing the crack in his master's armor, licked his frozen hand. The shelter's dim light seemed to soften. Survival had given way to something older, morning, and a slow, hard beginning. No one spoke. They simply breathed together, the living and the dead held in the warm, bone-vaulted dark. Outside, the world lay buried and silent. But inside the whale, hearts beat outnumbering the stillness for the first time. Samuel pushed against the frozen hide door. It cracked open, and a blade of still, bitter air slipped into the shelter. One by one, they crawled into the dawn, blinking at the white silence like newborns. The beach had been erased. Where the driftwood huts had stood, only splintered sticks poked through the snow.
Nothing left.
A woman reached out and touched one of the whale ribs, as if touching the bones of a saint.
It held.
Rook broke the stillness, bounding through the fresh powder and sending up clouds of white. The sun broke over the eastern sea, turning the frozen waves into a sheet of pale gold. Together, they stood in a ragged line, taking in the wreckage of their old life. The whale's ribs rose not as a tomb, but as the only standing structure on the coast, a monument to what the sea had given back. Mikolai turned from the wreckage and called the group together, his voice rough but steady. He walked toward Samuel, hand outstretched.
I was wrong. All of you. This man built what we could not. He saved us.
Samuel clasped the old man's hand. The grip was firm, frostbitten, but warm. A woman's voice rose from the huddle. He built a ship from bones.
The whale gave us more than bones. Blubber for the lamp, meat that won't spoil. It was waiting here all along.
They marveled at the resourcefulness that had turned a carcass into a storehouse.
We should build more like this. Use the ribs, the hides. Make a settlement that lasts.
We can extend the ribs. The whale can hold more.
They began to salvage what they could from the wreckage, dragging planks and frozen hides toward the whale's bones. Rook barked, circling the work, as if he too understood that the camp was no longer a collection of driftwood, but a crew around a bone-built home. Samuel knelt and showed them how to cut the blubber into strips, feeding the lamp, the oil pooling golden in the cold. A young survivor discovered a massive vertebra, worn smooth by the sea, and sank onto it, as if it were a throne. Using shards of bone, they carved needles and hooks from the whale's own ribs, their hands learning the old shapes.
This whale is a storehouse.
It died so we could live.
A quiet, reverent stillness settled over them as they looked at the bones with new eyes. They began to handle each rib with care, as if handling the dead with honor. Rook snuffled at a frozen heap of whale meat, tail wagging, as if the dog too understood the gift. Then, they shared a meal around the fire, the first without fear since the storm. Samuel stood back, looking up at the towering ribs, and felt the pull of something older than his own grief. Days passed. Then a solitary figure appeared at the edge of the camp, a white-haired hunter wrapped in furs, his face lined by a lifetime of northern winters.
He carries no weapon. He walks like he knows this place.
Samuel lowered his knife and walked out to meet the old man, who stopped before the ribs with a look of deep recognition. The elder drew a worn talisman from inside his furs, a tiny house carved from whalebone, its ribs polished by countless hands. His voice was rough but clear. Bone house. Old way. My people built them for centuries.
Not madness. Memory.
The old man traced the curve of a rib, nodding as if greeting an old friend. In broken words, he told how the earliest coastal people had used beached whales as winter homes, a gift returned from the sea.
You were following an old path, Samuel.
Samuel looked at the bone talisman. I was only trying to stay alive, he said. The elder smiled. That is how it always begins. The elder ran his hand along a rib and showed them how to shape the bone into a better frame, his ancient knowledge merging with their desperate craft. Samuel knelt with a younger man, showing him how to pack the snow tight into the seams. Feel the draft, he said. Then kill it. Soon, new domes rose across the snow, their hide roofs gleaming. The camp was becoming a village. From each chimney hole, a thread of smoke curled into the frosty air, marking the coast with the sign of life. Children ran between the huts, their laughter a sound the coast had not heard for months. Mikolai stood beside Samuel, watching the work. The old hostility had vanished, replaced by a quiet, unbreakable respect.
You gave us a home, Samuel.
The whale gave it. I just remembered.
The elder carved a new talisman, a larger bone house, and gave it to the village. It was a symbol of rebirth. A sense of permanence settled over the coast, as if the land itself accepted that people were meant to live here, inside the bones of the sea's great creature. The work of the village hummed behind him, but Samuel walked to the frozen shore, alone. He sat on a whale vertebra and pulled a small shard of rib bone from his pocket. With his belt knife, he began to carve, not a tool, but something smaller, something personal.
For the 7, he thought. Let their names not be lost.
He threaded a strip of leather through the carved pendant and tied it around his own neck. The weight of it settled against his chest, a burden and a release. Rook padded over and rested his heavy head on Samuel's knee. The dog's breath was warm in the dusk.
We made it, he whispered.
Above them, the aurora unfurled in ribbons of green and violet, as if the sky itself was breathing out peace. For the first time in months, Samuel smiled. It was a small thing, but it belonged to him. Months later, a trading schooner rounded the cape and its crew froze at the sight of a village built from giant bones. They beached their longboat and walked through the bone huts, their amazement growing with every step.
They called him mad for wintering inside a whale's ribs until it was the last warm shelter on the coast.
The sailors listened in stunned silence. The story spread through the ship's crew faster than any fire below deck. Samuel, his beard now threaded with gray, emerged from the original shelter with a quiet, settled air. He showed them the ribs, the lamp, the frozen meat, the simple genius that had turned a carcass into a home. A young sailor carved a word onto a driftwood plank and hammered it by the entrance. Bone House. The name caught on. Samuel stood on the shore and watched the ship depart. The sea no longer looked like a grave. Behind him, the settlement buzzed with life and laughter. The bones of the whale now sheltering a people who had been only survivors. Years passed. The settlement grew, and Samuel grew old, his hair white as the snow that had once been his enemy. He would sit with the children by the fire and teach them to lash small bone frames, models of the home that had saved them. One small boy asked him, "Were you afraid?"
Yes. But fear can build as well as break.
The children listened, entranced, their faces lit by the fire. Rook, now an old dog with a gray muzzle, dozed on a bed of furs, the warmth seeping through his bones. Behind them, the original shelter stood preserved, a weathered monument with a plaque that read, "The Bone House, where death gave life." The aurora danced again above the village, green and violet, as if celebrating the permanence of what Samuel had built.
The whale gave us more than survival. It gave us a story.
And in the oldest shelter on the coast, a new generation already knew the lesson. Use what the sea gives you, and even the bones of a giant can become a home. In the years after Samuel's passing, the settlement he founded still stood, its bone huts warm under the northern lights. Inside the meeting hut, a storyteller wove the old tale for a new generation. And the story always began the same way. They called him mad for wintering inside a whale's ribs, until it was the last warm shelter on the coast. Samuel's bone pendant hung from a rafter, gleaming in the firelight, a symbol of the 7 lost souls he had carried. The children listened, eyes wide, as the tale unfolded, of a shipwreck, a whale carcass, and a storm that changed everything. Outside, the whale ribs still stood against the sky, the same bones that had sheltered them all. The aurora swirled above, a silent witness to the enduring story, and every telling ended with the same refrain. But his madness built our home. The settlement settled into quiet, the story living on in every crack of the old bones. And along the frozen coast, the whale shelter remained, a monument not just to survival, but to the ancient wisdom that desperation can sometimes rediscover. The years swept over the frozen coast, and the original whale ribs grew weathered and ancient, still holding the shape of a home. The shelter stood empty, yet unbroken, a skeleton that had become a sanctuary. The Bone House, 1892. In the coldest places, the dead can shelter the living. The sun settled behind the ribs, casting long shadows across the snow, as if paying its respects, and the coastline lay serene, a frozen shore, no longer a place of despair, but a home. The sea was calm, as if it had forgiven the man it had failed to drown. And so the image fades, but the lesson of the Bone House remains. They called him mad for wintering inside a whale's ribs until it was the last warm shelter. End.